This is Darren from Danger by Degrees. So far we've covered 3 videos with respect to the Beirut disaster. The first video was generally a telling of the initial disaster and what it caused, and the death toll, the damage, just painting the picture of the misery that came from that day. The second video talked about the mechanics of the actual disaster, and that is being the ammonia nitrate that exploded, and how ammonia acts and how it can be such a deadly explosive agent. The third video talked about the MV Roses and how the story of this ship and all of its unholy cargo, this ammonium nitrate that was eventually taken off, was so emblematic. So the metaphor of this disaster could not be told better than through the telling of how the ship started, how it got to Beirut, and how by just neglect, all that ammonium nitrate ended up just sitting there and waiting just for the right circumstances to effectively just go boom. In this video, we're now going to kind of touch base with the current situation with respect to the people, the country, and the government. Join me as we talk all things disaster. First, we got to look at the people. Right now, across Beirut, 171 people who lived in and around that blast area perished. There are still 50 plus people who are missing. Most of the people that perished in that first blast wave were firefighters. Well, the firefighters would have been killed within the first 30 meters of the blast area. The dock workers that were in and around that first pier, there would have been the grain workers. Generally speaking, probably the majority of the people that were killed in the initial blast were within about 500 meters of that big explosion. But there are a number of people that were out on the streets. There were a large number of people that were inside their homes. And many of the people that died were basically hit with flying shrapnel. They were hit by falling debris. There's 6,000 people who have been injured. Many of the people who have now been injured will probably be anywhere from dealing with psychological stress because of shock from such a horrendous explosion. Many people will be suffering physical ailments, and the physical ailments will stem from either blast trauma, so they'll probably have internal injuries, or say depending on the situation, the blast would have not only knocked them over, but they could also ended up getting cranial trauma, or they'll end up having hearing problems because the blast wave creates inside the cranium. The shock wave ends up destabilizing the amount of air pressure inside your eardrums. So effectively, some people may end up having permanent hearing loss or hearing damage because the shock wave literally created an imbalance in the cranium, which ended up perforating the cochlea, the hearing organ. Other people could have lost limbs or suffered broken bones. Some people will probably have ended up experiencing disfigurement from either falling objects or from the blast wave basically hitting them so hard that it blows skin right off from the body. It is just so sad to think about. Psychologically speaking, and we're now getting into another category, a lot of the people who ended up being hit, their homes are no longer there. So you have 300,000 people who are now effectively without adequate shelter. Many of these buildings probably just need to have, say, cosmetic repairs, so windows being replaced, and their homes will be livable again, and cleaning out the interiors, and they'll probably be passable again. But other buildings probably suffered extreme or more extreme damages, such as structural, say, load-bearing walls were knocked out, key supports, load-bearing columns having been blasted out. Buildings in and around within 500 meters to a kilometer from the blast zone ended up having their entire exterior fascia, that is the skin, the windows, the facade, was just blown completely off. And you can see literally these tall towers that look like they're still under construction, but they were perfectly finished and full of life. But then when that blast hit, it stripped, the blast wave was so bad that it literally stripped all those windows off. It just completely removed the exteriors. So psychologically, a lot of people are now under extreme stress. They're under extreme stress because loved ones are dead. Loved ones are in hospitals. People are under extreme stress because they have no shelter, so they only have probably the clothes that are on their backs. A lot of people are probably under extreme stress because, well, the economy already in Lebanon was bad. Have they lost their homes, but they're now probably destitute? They have nothing to their name. So there's insecurity, there is trauma, there are people who have suffered physical injuries that will never go away. People are suffering from insecurity. They are suffering from the fact that their housing and their jobs are probably now impacted. There are many people who are suffering from psychological stress, and this could show itself in the coming days in the form of they may have sleeping problems, they may end up having interpersonal conflict, they're unable to think clearly, they'd be suffering from post-traumatic stress or critical incident stress episodes. There's going to be problems with finding food. People are going to need help finding places to live until their own places are fixed again. They're going to have problems just finding ability to pay and get their houses fixed in the beginning or anything at all. The social services are going to be extremely stressed. Beirut has seen its heart and its soul hit to its very core because all the symbols for everybody who, say, didn't lose any loved ones, who didn't lose or have any structural damages, so they still have their homes, they still generally have what could be passing off as a normal life. But now, when you take and see all the damage, that's going to be psychologically jarring to those people. But also, add on top of that, the people of Beirut also are going to have their gyms, their cultural centers, their churches, their mosques, their places of worship will have been damaged. The hospitals have been reduced by 50%. So when you have your normal everyday health problems, all of a sudden now there's half as much medical staff available, and it goes to show. The people are now under an extreme stress, and they're going to need all the help they can get. To understand what this disaster is going to do to the economy is to first look at what has gone on before the disaster hit. Before the disaster hit, the currency of Lebanon has taken hits. It has been devalued, and it's been going down and being devalued more and more. The country has been in a recession, which could almost be described as a depression, because month on month, quarter on quarter, the GDP has been steadily going down. The unemployment rate has been steadily going up. People who can afford to get out of Lebanon have been. There is systematic corruption that's gotten only worse. The government wasn't able to form a government effectively for almost 5 to 6 months. Mismanagement of the resources, well, the mismanagement of everything has just become intolerable. The fact is that most people in the bureaucracies don't stick their necks out. They just do not want to do anything. And it is this paralysis that has effectively made the situation pretty bad. So with the social situation, unemployment, a devalued dollar, the economy going down, productivity going down, it has not been a very good time to be in Beirut or Lebanon. And what doesn't help things is the fact that COVID has only accentuated, it's made the decline even more. Because not only has Beirut and Lebanon been hit, but almost every country in the world has been impacted negatively by what has been going on with COVID. Now add on top of that, the social pressures with all the unemployment has led to considerable amounts of rioting and anti-government protests. People are fed up. There's little to no confidence in the economy or in the dollar. Add on top of that, you now look at the port itself. The port of Beirut takes 85% of all of the food imports of the country go through Beirut. At least 60% plus of all of the heavy container and modular type of cargo goes through the port of Beirut. And then add the disaster that happened, Now you're looking at almost 10 to 15 billion dollars in damage. Effectively, the port has been just destroyed beyond belief. Some parts of the port, thankfully, are getting back up and running, and you're seeing some function, some cargo being unloaded, but right now, the main food store, the main grain elevator, has been completely just destroyed. At least half, if not more, of the support structures that were places of storage have been completely destroyed. Many of the holding yards where much of the container traffic was stored, well, not only was all that product that was in the containers just destroyed, but the area itself has now been made inoperable. With 10 to 15 billion dollars in damage, just think of all of the housing that's been hit, all of the infrastructure that's been damaged. When you look at the nation as a whole, Beirut is the main metro area, but you also have other parts of the country like Tyre, Tripoli, and so on. Beirut is not the only part of Lebanon. Beirut is a big metro area in Lebanon, but it is only a small part. But most of the people in all of Lebanon live in Beirut. Beirut's the heart and soul. That's where the capital is. That's where the government sits. But now the nation has suffered this disaster. Socially speaking, people are fed up. The country has suffered a disaster which is unimaginable. Things like this. What would happen if something like 1/10 to say 1/5 of the power of Hiroshima went off in a downtown core of, say, New York, or Washington, D.C., Vancouver, British Columbia, or Toronto in Canada? The damage would just be completely and utterly devastating. But now, the nation of Lebanon has been hit even worse than before. The government has resigned. Many of the people that were involved effectively just accepted that, well, it's better to quit than take the blame. The current president has now asked the former government to stay on in a caretaker role, so now there will have to be new elections. There's already been an increased anti-government protest than ever before. There was already anti-government demonstrations before, but now, with all the stuff that has gone on, people have risen up beyond belief. For a country that was hit hard and could be in what you could describe a depression, this event just couldn't happen at a worse time. The country is now being given a lifeline in emergency aid, but the strings attached to it require that there be some kind of oversight. They are not going to just give it in blocks of money to the government, because who knows who and their corrupt ways will end up siphoning that money off. Effectively, you now have a situation where the government has decided to quit rather than face the public. You now have a situation where the public is sick of the government. And as Al Jazeera said in a nice little report, they're saying that all the right requirements are there for Lebanon to become a failed state in the making. But let's stop with this negative and think of something like this. When you look at what's going on, there's no social services. There's been very little to any kind of government action being seen on the streets. There are photo ops of government ministers showing up with the foreign dignitaries. But where are the social services? Where are the safety nets? Where are the government structures getting out on the streets to get life back to normal? Where are the people clearing the street of rubble? Where are the people that are going to help all of those injured? They're not being seen. But this is where the positive can be seen. People from all over Lebanon, who are not even from Beirut, have been coming down on their days off to just sweep and clean up the rubble, just to clean and help at least return some people some sense of security. There have been volunteers that have been going door to door to check on people. There has been the NGOs that have been working without government sanction. They got into gear and did it themselves, who have been providing the social services that should have been provided by the government, but the government is nowhere to be seen. So the people are organizing themselves The people are working with their fellow countrymen in a way that you would never have guessed would have happened. For a country that is supposedly so divided, they're looking like they're very united. People are offering psychological support where they need it. People are helping those who've lost homes find temporary shelter. There are those who are even offering everything from interior decorating help to just help with fixing broken windows. People are using this event as a motivator to do something instead of complaining about things. They are taking it in their own hands. They're taking their own destiny, and they're basically saying if the government's not going to do anything, then we've got to. And you're seeing a civil structure starting from the ground up and effectively taking charge of the recovery effort themselves. Whereas in many countries you would see some kind of government response directing and working with NGOs and working with the public wherever possible. Well, since there is no government leading on this, it's the people leading themselves. If there's one bright side to take from this, we're seeing the people of Lebanon take responsibility for themselves, and it's from them as a nation. They're ignoring their government and they're doing things for themselves by themselves. They've started fixing this themselves, and only time will tell if an organized and concentrated effort can be maintained. There might just be a silver lining in this, and that a lot of the negative events that have overshadowed Lebanon may be able to be overcome by themselves. We can only hope. So we've now talked about the people, we've talked about the economy, and we've talked about the government, the nation. To sum this up, the people have suffered, the economy continues to suffer, and the government has resigned. But what we shouldn't, or what should be talked about, is the resiliency that is now being shown. People in Beirut are taking care of their neighbors like they've never before. They've said enough is enough, and they are effectively taking it upon themselves to do what the government will not. The one good thing that we can take from that is that even through the darkest hour, people are getting out their flashlights and they're showing the light at the end of the tunnel. Call whatever cliche you want. I'm actually impressed beyond belief, personally, from what I see. People have had it. This is just one more thing that should drag the country down. It should be the thing that breaks the will of the people. It should finally lead Lebanon over that proverbial cliff, but it's not. People are working with their neighbors, they're working together, they're working through all the NGOs, they're working through volunteer groups that are springing up spontaneously and are trying to find their own solutions and are doing their damnedest to get over this. And all I can say is they're going to teach us a lesson about resiliency if I ever saw it. So if you've been watching this and you've been listening to me, this is Darren. This is Danger by Degrees.